In the early hours of Valentine's Day 2013, neighbors heard a woman screaming behind a locked bathroom door. Seconds later, bullets rang out and the screams stopped. Oscar Pistorius had shot and killed his girlfriend Reeva Steenkamp in his home. How could a national hero, a Paralympic champion known as the Blade Runner, be at the center of such a horrific incident? The story of what happened inside that house on a day that's supposed to be about love and connection became fiercely debated, and the autopsy became the only voice that could speak the truth, and what it revealed was chilling. Welcome to the True Crime Nurse, everybody. My name is Kat, and I'm a registered nurse who loves all things nursing and true crime. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell before you go. All right, my friends, let's get into today's Valentine's Day case. As always, we're going to start with some background on all the parties involved. Oscar Pistorius was born on November 22nd, 1986 in Johannesburg, South Africa. Oscar was born missing his fibulas, or the outer bone between the knee and ankle, in both legs from a congenital condition. At just 11 months old, his parents made the difficult decision to have both of Oscar's legs amputated below the knee so that he could be fitted with prosthetic legs and learn how to walk on them. His mother, Sheila, raised Oscar and his siblings to be independent and tough, but sadly, she passed away when Oscar was only 15 years old. This deeply affected him, and Oscar said that his mom was his source for inspiration and motivation throughout his life. Despite his disability, Oscar was an active child who never let his disability stop him from playing sports. He played rugby, water polo, tennis, and more during his school years at Pretoria Boys High School. After a rugby knee injury in 2003, Oscar took up running as part of his rehabilitation using running prosthetics. It turned out that he had a remarkable natural talent for sprinting. Within months, he was competing in disabled sports meets and he broke all the records. He ran on carbon fiber prosthetic blades, and this is how he earned his famous nickname Blade Runner. Oscar became internationally known as an elite Paralympic sprinter, winning all kinds of awards like getting gold at the 2004 Athens Paralympics, and he dominated the T44 events at the 2008 Beijing Paralympics. In 2012, he even made history as the first double amputee to compete in the Olympic Games. By 2013, Oscar was at the height of his fame. In South Africa, he was like a national hero and an inspiration, featured on magazine covers, backed by major sponsors like Nike and Oakley, and he was admired by everybody. He had a lot of financial success, and he lived the high life in a luxury gated estate in Pretoria because of it. But behind the heroic image, those that knew Oscar said that he had another side to him. He was fiercely competitive, and he could be temperamental too. His drive to succeed sometimes manifested as restlessness or impulsiveness in his personal life, and Oscar had a known love for speed. He enjoyed fast cars, boats, and firearms, and people in his friend group described him as a gun enthusiast who went to the shooting ranges all the time. He owned multiple guns, and he slept with a 9mm gun under his bed for security. He applied for licenses for a few more guns too, but South Africa has a very high rate of violent crime, and Oscar said that he felt vulnerable because of his disability and the lack of security bars on some of his own windows. He also mentioned receiving threats, and he had had some break-ins in the past. This made him feel a little on edge even in his own home. Friends and family said that Oscar could be anxious about security, and he kept a baseball bat for protection, plus his guns, and he had an elaborate home alarm system. The gated community that he lived in already had a 24-hour security setup too. This may seem over the top to people like you and I, but remember, for people in the limelight, they can be targeted for burglary, kidnapping, and murder. So some of the anxiety that he had was valid, plus he'd had break-ins in the past. Oscar's personal life also drew quite a bit of media attention, and this is when he met Reeva. Reeva Rebecca Steenkamp was the woman who captured Oscar's heart in 2012. Reeva was born on August 19, 1983 in Cape Town, South Africa. She was the only child of Barry and June, but she had a couple of half-siblings from her father's previous marriage. She was extremely close to her parents and often traveled back to Port Elizabeth to spend time with them. Barry and June were proud of their daughter's accomplishments, but they also valued her down-to-earth attitude because Reeva remained humble despite all of her success. She made it a priority to send them loving texts every single day. Her friends described her as bubbly, sincere, and generous, and when Reeva was little, the family moved to Port Elizabeth, and that's where she grew up, and this is a beautiful coastal city. Reva was warm, kind, ambitious, and her friends said that she was the sweetest, kindest soul and someone who lit up a room with her smile and personality. Reva was not just a model with a pretty face, though. She was also bright and educated. She attended college at the Nelson Mandela Metropolitan University in Port Elizabeth, where she studied law. In 2005, Reva graduated with a Bachelor of Laws degree, planning to become an attorney. However, by the time she graduated, her modeling career had started to take off, and she decided to move to Johannesburg to pursue modeling opportunities. This wasn't her end goal, though, because she was still considering finishing her legal studies later on. In Johannesburg, Reva made a huge name for herself in the fashion and modeling industry. She was represented by a top modeling agency, and she appeared in many advertisements and campaigns. Reva's striking looks with her blonde hair, green eyes, and radiant smile even landed her on magazine covers, and in 2011, she was named one of FHM's 100 Sexiest Women in the World. She was also the face of Avon Cosmetics in South Africa, and she was in ads for companies like Toyota and Clover. She was rapidly shooting to stardom. Reva was passionate about the issue of women's empowerment and spoke out against gender-based violence, and she used her social media presence to advocate for women's rights. In the weeks before her death, she'd been more vocal than normal about the issue of violence against women in South Africa. Tragically, on the night before her death, Reva posted an inspirational message on Twitter urging people to make Valentine's Day a day of love for others, and she also shared a campaign encouraging women to wear black in protest of violence towards women. By 2013, Reva's career was on an upswing, and she finally made her debut on television. She'd been selected as a cast member on a South African reality TV show called Tropica Island of Treasure, which was a Survivor-style series that featured many celebrities, and it was filmed in Jamaica. She was so excited about this opportunity, and the show was set to start airing in February 2013. Reva was also scheduled to give a motivational speech at a Johannesburg school on the very morning of February 14th, 2013, and sadly, this is the day that she died. She'd prepared notes for a speech about empowerment, self-value, and fighting against violence in relationships. She planned to share advice and encouragement with young girls, sharing some of her own personal experiences and values. That speech, which she never got to deliver, was later read by her mother to honor Reva's memory and message. But before we get into the tragic events of that fateful night, we need to talk about the relationship between the two of them and how it came to be. Oscar and Reva met in early November 2012 through a mutual friend. On November 4th, 2012, they were introduced to each other at a social gathering in Johannesburg. Oscar was immediately taken by Reva's beauty and charm, so he pursued her. They exchanged phone numbers and began chatting and texting all the time right after they met. The sparks were instant. A few days later, Oscar invited Reva to come with him to a gala, which was the South African Sports Awards, as his date. She agreed, and they made their first public appearance together at that event, looking glamorous and happy. From that point on, they were inseparable whenever their schedules allowed it. Their romance progressed quickly. Both were busy, but they made time for each other. They were seen out at restaurants, and Reva began spending more and more time at Oscar's home, too. Because Reva lived primarily in Johannesburg, which was about an hour away, she would usually spend the night at Oscar's house whenever they made plans, instead of driving home late at night. Oscar's home in the upscale Silverwoods estate was a modern, multi-level townhouse with high walls and a tight security entrance, and this made Reva feel very safe when she was there. Friends of the couple said that Oscar and Reva seemed very much in love during those early months. Reva gushed about Oscar to her close friends, saying that he was very romantic and treated her like gold most of the time. Oscar's family and friends found Reva to be a positive, calming influence on him, and they were always seen laughing and being affectionate in public, holding hands at events or cuddling off in a corner at parties. Reva even spent Christmas of 2012 with Oscar and his family. Their relationship was really beginning to blossom. However, like any other couple, Oscar and Reva had issues behind closed doors. They had their share of arguments and misunderstandings because they were two strong-willed individuals, and Oscar's personality, especially his jealousy and anxiety, did create tension in the relationship. They communicated frequently through WhatsApp to text each other, and these conversations later became part of the police investigation. In one message from late January 2013, Reva wrote to Oscar, "I'm scared of you sometimes and how you snap at me and how you react to me." This message was sent about 3 weeks before she died, and this tells us that Reva was afraid of Oscar's temper. She added, quote, "We're living in a double standard relationship. You get upset if I mention something small, but I'm not some other B word trying to kill your vibe. You make me happy 90% of the time, and I think we're amazing together, but I can't be pushed and pulled and touched by outsiders and you as well. I shouldn't have to prove myself to you," end quote. Although this couple had many loving moments, Reva was obviously struggling and she was making it known to him. In January 2013, the couple attended a friend's engagement party, and Oscar became angry that Reva was talking to another man while there. Some reports say that this was an ex of hers, but others say that it was just a friend. But regardless, there was a confrontation and tense ride home. Reva's text afterward said that she felt picked on and afraid of Oscar and how he might react in anger. Oscar replied apologetically through text, saying that he was just jealous and scared and that he loved her. He also mentioned that he sometimes got upset because he felt that Reva paid more attention to other men flirting with her, but she denied that that was ever what was happening. He was clearly feeling very insecure and sensitive at the time, but despite these bumps, Reva stayed in the relationship because she believed things could improve. In public, everything seemed fine. In early February 2013, they were seen arm in arm at sports functions, smiling for the cameras, and Reva shared some pictures of them on social media and they seemed happy. By mid-February, Oscar and Reva had been dating now for about 3 months. So, in any new relationship, emotions run high and couples are still learning each other. But they shared many tender moments and had started making future plans. Reva's friends said that she did tell them that Oscar could be difficult at times and that she was trying to adapt to his needs, but it never seemed to be enough. As Valentine's Day 2013 approached, Reva seemed excited and optimistic about their future still. On February 13th, so just one day before today's events take place, she was making a surprise for Oscar. She told a shop assistant that her boyfriend really loves Valentine's Day, and she bought a card, some wrapping paper, and a picture frame that had 4 pictures of her and Oscar. Reva, being a romantic, had also left little post-it notes all around Oscar's house for him to find later. She planned to spend the night at Oscar's that night and looked forward to spending Valentine's Day with him. That morning, Reva was on social media and she tweeted asking, "What do you all have up your sleeves for tomorrow? Hashtag get excited, hashtag Valentine's Day." Her posts really show how excited she was for that day. Reva headed over to Oscar's place that afternoon. Oscar's neighborhood had controlled access and was generally considered safe and quiet. Oscar's bedroom led out to a balcony, and because Oscar was very conscious of security, he kept outdoor lights on at night, and he also had that alarm system with sensors, so this was covered upstairs as well. We don't know exactly what time Reva arrived at Silverwoods that evening, but it's believed to be around 5 or 6 p.m. She drove herself in her car, which was a Mini Cooper, and she let herself in through Oscar's front door using the key that he gave her. At 6 p.m. on February 13th, Oscar had an appointment with his friend and personal trainer, Justin Devaris, to pick up a special Valentine's Day gift that he had made for Reva, which was a custom pair of earrings. However, according to Justin, Oscar canceled that meeting saying something came up and he couldn't make it. I found this strange, but let me know if you find it odd as well, especially knowing that Reva was coming over to celebrate for Valentine's Day. What would he have given her? What we do know now is that by the evening, Oscar and Reva were together at his home settling in for the night. According to Oscar, the couple had a quiet evening. They planned a private Valentine's Day get-together at home since Reva had to be up early to go to the school for that speech, and Oscar said that Reva came with an overnight bag, which the police later did find. Oscar mentioned that around 7 p.m. they ate dinner and Reva did some yoga exercises. He said that Reva changed into comfy clothes and did her yoga stretches before bed like she always did. She was known to be very health conscious and practiced yoga regularly to stay fit and relaxed, so this wasn't unusual for her. Oscar was laying in bed watching TV and he took off his prosthetic legs for the night. The couple talked, and at one point, neighbors later mentioned hearing what sounded like laughter or talking from Oscar's home earlier that evening, so nothing seemed off. Oscar's bedroom was set up to where the bed faced a wall with a TV, and there were 2 small bedside tables on either side of the bed. On the opposite side of the room, glass doors led out to a balcony, and that night was a warm South African summer night. Oscar mentioned the air conditioning wasn't working well, so he said that he had 2 fans running, with one just inside the balcony door and another on the balcony itself to pull the cooler night air inside. The couple went to bed around 10 or 11 p.m., but Reva got up at some point for a late night snack. Sometime after 2 a.m., Oscar says he woke up. He was sleeping on the left side of the bed, and Reva was asleep next to him. Oscar felt hot because, like I said, it was a humid night and the fans were still running with the balcony door still slightly open. He decided to get up to move one fan and close the sliding door to block out the humid air. At this point, he did not have on his prosthetic legs, so he was walking on his stumps. The bedroom was very dark and the curtains were drawn, and only a small LED light was on from a stereo that was glowing, and this actually bothered Oscar. At some point, he got up to adjust the fan and cover up the light, but he heard a noise in the bathroom. He described it as the sound of a window sliding open and possibly a slam as it hit the frame. The bathroom had a big window, which was usually left open for some ventilation at night, but Oscar said he thought that it was opened even more by someone coming in. Just a quick side note, but there were also some construction ladders outside of his bathroom window because they had been left by the contractors, which immediately made him think that an intruder could have used those to climb up and then into the window. Oscar says that he was overcome with fear and a sense of terror in that moment, thinking that one or more of the intruders had entered his home through the bathroom. In the dark and vulnerable while still on his stumps, he felt trapped. Now, the layout here is important. The main bedroom opens into a short hall that leads to the bathroom at the end of it. In that passage, on one side is the closet area and on the other side is the bathroom entrance. And don't worry, I will show you pictures so it makes more sense. Inside the bathroom, to the right, there is a separate small toilet cubicle with its own door. It wasn't an intruder behind that door, though, this whole time. It was Reva. According to Oscar, upon hearing the noise, he immediately assumed Reva was still in bed asleep. Oscar claims that he whispered to Reva to get down and call the police, thinking that an intruder was present. He did not hear a response from Reva, which he claims he thought that she was still waking up maybe, and that's why she didn't answer him. Oscar grabbed his pistol from under the bed, though. This gun was loaded with hollow point ammunition, and these bullets are designed to expand upon impact to cause maximum damage. Let me know if you remember us talking about that at length in the Selena video. With the gun in hand, Oscar says that he proceeded in the dark towards the bathroom on his stumps, feeling extremely vulnerable and scared. He shouted a few times at the perceived intruder, yelling things like, "Get out of my house!" And he was also shouting to Reva to call the police as he moved down the hallway toward the intruder. At this moment, what was Reva doing? Oscar's story is that Reva said nothing back to him and she was still in bed. The prosecution later would argue that Reva was awake and she had possibly fled from an argument with Oscar and locked herself in the bathroom. Neighbors heard screams during this time, which we will get into a little later on. But in Oscar's story, he doesn't acknowledge any screams from Reva or any conversation with her at all. He remains that he had no idea that she wasn't in bed until after the shooting happened. Now, as Oscar reached the entrance of the bathroom area, he could see in the darkness that the bathroom window was in fact open. The only light in the bathroom was coming from outside, and he could not see into the toilet area because the door was shut. Oscar positioned himself just outside the door of the enclosed toilet area with his arms outstretched with the gun. He was scared that if the intruder came out, he'd be attacked. At some point, he heard movement from inside the toilet area, possibly Reva moving, or maybe even muffling a response, but he didn't understand who it was or what they were saying. Oscar describes this as hearing the wood moving or the handle, so this could have been the intruder trying to come out of the bathroom. Oscar at this point was terrified and says that he fired multiple shots through the door. He didn't have his legs on, again, remember that, so he was lower to the ground than usual, and he fired 4 times at about chest height for him, aiming upward. The gunshots were heard by several people close by, though. Immediately after firing the gun, Oscar claims his ears were ringing from the gunshots in that tiny space, and he said that he couldn't hear anything. There was smoke and splintered wood from the door in the air, and Oscar shouted for Reva, but again heard nothing. He stayed by the bathroom for a moment with his adrenaline pumping and heart racing. Then he moved backwards towards the bedroom, still in the dark, still on his stumps, and still pointing the gun towards the bathroom just in case an intruder came out. As Oscar reached the bed, he felt across it for Reva. He realized that she wasn't there. It finally dawned on him at this moment that it could have been Reva in that toilet area. That's what he said. He insists that up until that point, he had thought that Reva was still in bed, but now a dreadful possibility hit him. Had he shot Reva by mistake? By about 3:14 in the morning, Oscar began shouting Reva's name. The night had been pierced by multiple gunshots, and now the quiet of the early morning was broken by more of Oscar's screams. Neighbors did hear a man crying loudly during this time. Oscar rushed back towards the bathroom and he tried the handle of the door, but it was locked. He threw his shoulder multiple times against the door, trying to bust it open, but the door was solid and it didn't budge. He continued yelling and panicking. Realizing that he needed his prosthetic legs on to properly force the door open, Oscar turned back and ran to the bedroom to put them on. He also finally turned the lights on, and the gruesome scene became even more clear. There were bullet holes in the door, and blood had started to pool and seep from under the door onto the bathroom floor. Oscar strapped on his legs as quickly as he could, and he ran back to the bathroom and attempted to kick the toilet door open, but he couldn't. He needed another approach. Near the bathroom entrance against the wall, Oscar kept a cricket bat. It was a wood and cork bat that had been given to him after it was signed by a lot of the members of the South African national cricket team. This was a treasured gift that he had, but now he needed to use it because this was an emergency. He struck the door multiple times. The door was made of thick Mertani wood, but with repeated blows, the planks had splintered and cracked, creating a hole big enough to finally peer inside. Oscar peeked through the hole, and what he saw was devastating. Reva was curled up on the floor with her body draped over the collapsed magazine rack, and her head was slumped over the toilet bowl. Blood was everywhere, on the toilet, on the floor, and on her. Oscar dropped the bat, reached through the hole, and managed to grab the key, which ironically had fallen to the floor on the inside. Oscar unlocked the toilet door and flung it open, and he found Reva. She was alive but barely hanging on. I want to point out that the key being on the inside was very telling to me. I wondered if Reva locked herself in the bathroom to get away from Oscar, and she took the key in there with her so he couldn't force his way in. Let me know if that crossed your mind too. Reva was gasping for air, and her clothes were soaked in blood. She was still wearing what she had slept in. Reva's long blonde hair was matted with blood, and she had horrific wounds. She had one on her head with bone fragments and brain tissue exposed, and one on the arm, which was twisting at an unnatural angle, and one on her hip. Oscar dropped to his knees beside her, horrified and overwhelmed. He later said that he was beside himself, and he didn't remember screaming for help at that moment, but neighbors heard someone wailing. He gently tried to lift Reva, but there was blood all over that small room as he picked her up, and more blood gushed from her wounds onto him. At about 3:16 across the street, a man named Dr. Johann Stipp heard the noises and saw the lights come on in Oscar's bathroom, and then he heard Oscar's distressed crying. Sensing that something was very wrong and that someone might be hurt, Dr. Stipp decided to go over and help. He quickly threw on his clothes and headed out, making his way to Oscar's home. Other neighbors, like the estate security guard and the estate manager, were also now alerted because at least one neighbor had called the community security line to report the gunshots. I found it very surprising that they did this instead of just calling the police, but I'm thinking that this could be the norm in South Africa. If you're watching from there, or maybe if you've been there or lived there for a period of time, let us know in the comments if this is normal. Oscar dragged Reva's body out into the larger bathroom area as he was crying and in total shock. According to Oscar, Reva was still breathing at this point but not responsive, so he ran to get his phone to call for help. Phone records show that Oscar made several urgent calls within just a few minutes after the shooting. The first call that he made was at 3:19 a.m. to Johann Stander, who was the estate manager of Silverwoods and also a neighbor who lived within the same estate. Mr. Stander was someone that Oscar felt could come and help quickly. When Stander answered, Oscar was screaming and crying so incoherently, but he did say he shot Reva and he needed him to come quickly. Stander said he would be on his way, and he lived very close by, but he woke his daughter up, his adult daughter, and they rushed to go over to Oscar's to help. At 3:20 a.m., Oscar called emergency medical services. This was to a company called Netcare 911, which is actually a private ambulance service. This is another thing that I found different, but he begged them to send an ambulance to his address, telling them that he had accidentally shot his girlfriend and she was badly hurt. Oscar then received a call from the estate's night security guard, and his name is Peter Baba. He was calling to check on what happened, and here's why. Another neighbor called the front gate security to report gunshots too, so security made a round with their partner towards Oscar's house and they saw Oscar's lights on. He called Oscar's phone at 3:21 a.m. According to Baba, when Oscar answered, Oscar said everything's fine, but he was crying. Baba said that it was very suspicious because he was clearly not fine, but since Oscar was crying and before he could ask him anything else, the call was just cut. After those calls, Oscar's focus then went to Reva. He removed the barricade of fans and opened the bedroom door that led downstairs. He unlocked it so that anyone coming to help, like the paramedics or neighbors, could come in from downstairs easily and help him. Then Oscar somehow managed to pick up Reva's body and carry her downstairs. He brought her down the staircase from his bedroom to the ground floor entrance. As he was walking down, though, he left a trail of blood smears on the walls, and Reva's blood soaked onto Oscar's shorts and prosthetic legs. Halfway down, he was met by Johann Stander and his daughter. They had just arrived and had entered through the front door that Oscar left open for them. They were shocked seeing Oscar coming down from the stairs, crying, barefoot with his prosthetic legs on and holding Reva's limp body. He was completely distraught and pleading for help. They saw that Reva was critically injured, and Oscar laid Reva down near the front door because he couldn't carry her any farther without help. They placed her on her back, and within moments, Dr. Johann Stipp also arrived through the front door, and he found Oscar kneeling over Reva in tears while trying to clear her airway. He had 2 fingers in Reva's mouth in an attempt to open her jaw and prevent her tongue from blocking her throat, and his other hand was pressed firmly on her hip wound to try to slow the bleeding. He was begging Reva to stay alive. According to Dr. Stipp, Oscar was praying and saying, "Please, God, let her live. She must not die." He kept repeating, "Reva, oh Reva, I'll dedicate my life to you," and other heartbreaking phrases as he was weeping over her. Dr. Stipp gently moved Oscar aside to check Reva's vital signs, and it was immediately clear to the doctor that her injuries had already been fatal. He noticed the gaping wound on her head with brain tissue exposed, and in his mind, this was an unsurvivable trauma. He felt no pulse in her neck and no breathing. If there was any heartbeat at all, it was faint and not effectively circulating her blood. He said that as a medical professional, he knew from her dilated pupils and lack of signs of life that she was already gone, but he waited until the emergency services arrived. He did still try to help, though, beginning by checking her airway and attempting CPR, but her wounds were so severe, particularly the head wound, that there was nothing meaningful that could be done in that moment. During this time, Oscar was in a state of complete breakdown. He kept saying, I shot her, I thought that she was a burglar." According to Stipp and the Standers, Oscar was completely traumatized and seemed genuinely devastated. At one point, Oscar turned to Dr. Stipp and literally asked, "Is there anything you can do?" like a desperate plea for a miracle. Stipp told him that there was nothing more that could be done on their own and that they needed to wait for the ambulance. I'm sure that those seconds ticked by and they must have been agonizing. The security guard Peter arrived around that same time. The Standers tried to calm Oscar down, but he was inconsolable, so Dr. Stipp actually asked one of the others to keep an eye on Oscar's pistol to make sure that he didn't hurt himself. By the time the paramedics finally arrived, after having some issues getting into the estate, Reva had no signs of life. The paramedics formally pronounced Reva Steenkamp dead on scene. It was at about 3:50 in the morning when the ambulance crew confirmed her death, but the doctor said she had died within minutes of being shot. Oscar's reaction to hearing that Reva had passed was gut-wrenching. He sobbed, asking God why this had happened, and repeatedly said, "I will never forgive myself." Police officers were next to enter the scene. They found a chaotic and emotional scene because there was a critically injured, now deceased woman, a distraught famous athlete covered in blood, and several neighbors trying to console him. The officers immediately roped off the area and began their standard procedures, though. They moved Oscar away from Reva's body so that they could then begin the investigation, and one officer said that Oscar was begging them to wash his hands because they were sticky with Reva's blood, and he felt sick to his stomach from the smell and sight of it. Initially, they refused since his body and clothing were evidence, but eventually, as things calmed down, they did allow him to rinse his hands and later remove the blood-soaked clothing after the pictures were taken. Oscar was cooperative, though, but emotional, and he kept saying that it was just an accident, and he thought that she was the intruder. Police took his gun, which was still found on the bathroom floor, and they also found the spent shell casings. Reva's cell phones, yes, she had 2 phones with her, were both found. One was found inside the toilet area on the floor near her body, which was another detail I found important. Was she calling for help? By that morning, the news had started to spread, though, and Oscar was under arrest on scene. Reva's body was taken to the morgue for autopsy, which we will get into a little later on, but the world was quickly made aware that a day meant for love had turned into a day of tragedy. By sunrise on February 14th, 2013, the house at 286 Silverwoods Country Estate was swarming with professionals trying to make sense of what happened. No one other than authorized personnel could come in or out. Oscar was taken into the police station that morning, so investigators had the house to themselves to work on, and the lead investigator initially on scene was Detective Hilton Botha. His team's first priorities were to secure the firearm, ensure Reva's body and surrounding area were preserved for forensics, and to get initial statements from witnesses outside. They also conducted an initial walkthrough to see the layout of the house. Detective Botha noticed right away the bullet holes in the toilet door and the cricket bat by the bathroom. The whole bathroom floor was slippery with blood and fragments from wood in the door, and Reva's flip-flop sandals were on the bathroom floor as well. In the bedroom, they found Reva's overnight bag on the chair with her clothes neatly folded, and this was obviously consistent with someone who had planned to spend the night there. On the bed itself, there was a Valentine's Day gift bag addressed to Ozzy from Reva, which was the surprise that she had had made for him. Oscar's pistol was on a mat just outside the shower in the bathroom where he had dropped it after the shooting. Like we talked about, it's a 9mm gun with the slide locked open, so all the rounds had been fired. There were 4 spent 9mm cartridge casings on the floor. Some were inside the toilet area and some were in the main bathroom. Ballistic investigators used the casings' positions to figure out the position and movement of the shooter, and typically, this type of gun ejects spent casings up and to the right of the shooter. The casings were found in somewhat different spots, which meant that Oscar may have been moving a little bit or maybe swinging as he was shooting the gun. The toilet cubicle itself was a horrifying sight, though. 2 of the panels in the door were smashed out from Oscar's bat, and through the holes in the door, investigators could see the interior had been soaked with blood. The white toilet bowl had smears of blood and a bullet mark on it, and a pool of congealed blood was still on the floor where Reva had been laying, with drag marks present from when Oscar pulled her out. The magazine rack was broken, and there were also some small towels in that main bathroom, one of which was completely covered in blood. Every angle of the door and its holes were documented. Markers were placed next to each bullet casing and bullet fragment, and bloodstains and spatters were on the walls. They were all documented for later interpretation by the experts, too. They noticed that high up on the wall of the main bathroom, near the light switch, there was a spray of blood and brain tissue. That corresponds to when Oscar was carrying Reva out of the bathroom. Her severe head wound likely projected onto the wall at that height, which really tells us how severe this was. Downstairs, the evidence of the aftermath was also everywhere. Blood smears on the walls were found where Oscar had carried Reva and bumped into the wall, and the staircase had droplets of blood and blood at the bottom of it where Reva's body had been laid, and there was a huge patch of blood on the tile floor and a towel that had been placed under her right next to the front door. Police recovered the cricket bat that was lying on the bathroom floor, and it had traces of Reva's blood and hair on it from breaking down the door and possibly when Oscar used it to wedge the door to move her. One item that stood out, though, was the presence of multiple cell phones on scene. Oscar had 3 phones in the house, 2 of his own, 1 work and 1 personal, and 2 belonged to Reva. Strangely, Oscar's personal iPhone was found in the bathroom on the floor, so he might have carried it in at some point during the incident. Another one of Oscar's phones was in the bedroom. When police tried to examine them, Oscar said that he couldn't remember the code to unlock one of his phones, though. This was very suspicious, but remember, trauma can do very strange things to the brain in the moment. One of the most critical parts of the investigation, though, was understanding the shooting trajectory. They needed to validate Oscar's story because that is what's going to separate an accident from murder here. Where was Oscar standing when he fired the gun? Does the evidence match this story? And what position was Reva in when she was shot? These answers would help either corroborate or challenge Oscar's story. Captain Christian Mangena was the lead ballistics expert, and he reconstructed the bathroom door and traced the bullet paths using rods through the holes. The 4 shots were tightly grouped together, showing controlled, aimed shots rather than panic shooting. The trajectory also showed a slightly angled path, which was consistent with Oscar firing from a lower height on his stumps and possibly leaning forward. The captain said that the most likely sequence of events was the first shot struck Reva's right hip while she was standing and turning, and it knocked her down. Then there was a second shot that either missed or grazed her, then a third shot that shattered her right arm as she raised it to protect herself. Then that final shot struck her left hand and entered her head, causing that fatal injury. Ballistics evidence supported Oscar's story that he fired from his stumps because the bullet hole height matched his stump height. Investigators also found the cricket bat marks were higher up on the door, and this was consistent with him putting on his prosthetics before he came back to break it down. Outside of the bullets, though, investigators looked for any other signs of a physical struggle here. What stood out the most was how ordinary the bedroom looked despite everything that had just happened. Reva's slippers were tucked under the bed, her jeans sat folded on the ottoman, and nothing appeared smashed or disturbed anywhere. The duvet was half on the bed and half on the floor, which also raised some questions about whether or not there had been a chase maybe or an argument there. Oscar said that he pulled the duvet down in a panic while searching for Reva after the shooting, though. Prosecutors floated the idea that it could have been thrown during an argument, but there was no physical evidence to support that. I mean, how would there be? Their DNA would be all over that room anyway. The TV was on but muted, and the placement of the fans, extension cords, and curtains were all looked at to see if his version of events matched how the room was left. Neighbors said that they saw lights on, but Oscar said that the curtains were closed. Police found that the curtains were drawn, which left room for multiple explanations. None of these details on their own, though, definitively proved or disproved an argument. A major point that needed to get ironed out was whether Reva and Oscar had been fighting loudly before the shooting or not. Several neighbors reported hearing a woman shouting and screaming, but there were no recordings, only eyewitness accounts and statements. So from a physical standpoint, the scene didn't show any clear signs of a fight, and there were no injuries on Oscar, and no defensive scratches or skin under Reva's nails, and no damage suggesting a struggle beyond the shooting. I'm still stuck on her being in the bathroom, though, with her phone, key to the door, and the door being locked. The investigation was also complicated because of how the scene had been handled. The initial lead investigator ended up stepping down due to unrelated legal issues, and his early mistakes hurt the prosecution's credibility. One of Oscar's expensive watches went missing from the bedroom during evidence being processed, and it was never recovered, which raised serious concerns about theft and carelessness at the scene. The lead investigator is who would be held responsible for a huge mistake like that. The defense also said that certain objects appeared to be moved between the photos that had been taken because of officers moving the items around, and anyone that frequently watches true crime knows that this is a huge no-no. Many questions about sounds, arguments, and timing could be argued, but to understand what Reva experienced physically and how quickly events folded, investigators needed to rely on what the autopsy showed. The postmortem exam of Reva was done on February 15th, so just the day after her death. The autopsy reinforced that Reva sustained 3 major gunshot wounds, one to the head, one to her right arm, and one to her right hip. Each injury was severe, and at least 2 of them could have been independently fatal. In addition to these wounds, there were some other minor injuries like abrasions and bruising that we're also going to touch on. But first, the gunshot to Reva's head was on the right side. The bullet struck her in the right upper skull around the temple forehead area, and it entered the cranial cavity, causing extensive fracturing to the skull. The pathologist wrote that the bullet went under the skull and then it exited through a second wound on her other side of her head. This exit was more towards the top or back of her head in an upward trajectory. Part of the bullet lodged into her brain tissue, and this would have caused massive trauma to the brain, which would lead to an immediate loss of consciousness and rapid death. Reva wouldn't have been able to scream or feel any pain, and this is significant because if that was the final shot, it means that any screams that the neighbors heard had to have happened before this, meaning an argument. Reva's right upper arm between the elbow and the bicep was also struck by the bullet. The bullet hit the humerus bone with such force that it shattered it into several pieces internally. There was an entry and exit wound on the arm, so the bullet did go through, and the wounds on her arm were large with torn, irregular edges, and this is consistent with the hollow point bullet expanding once it hit the bone. That wound would have been extremely painful, but probably not fatal. It would disable that arm completely, though, and it could also cause significant bleeding. The bullet that struck Reva in the right hip entered near the groin hip joint area on the right side, and it caused a massive fracture to the femur or thigh bone where it connects to the pelvis. This shattered the hip bone and it hit the femoral artery and other vessels in that area, meaning rapid and significant internal bleeding occurred. Dr. Stipp, who remember saw her at the scene, noticed that the wound on her right thigh was bleeding profusely, and that's why. The professor that performed the autopsy said that this wound alone could have been fatal, even if it were the only injury, because of the blood loss and shock that would follow. There was also an injury to Reva's left hand, specifically in the webbing between her index finger and thumb on the left side. This was from a bullet grazing or passing through her hand when she tried to protect her head. There were also bruises found on Reva's back, buttocks, and chest, and these places were not hit by bullets, but when bullets smashed through the door, bits of the wood and fragments sprayed in all directions. Some struck her, causing some smaller bruises, but one significant bruise on her back could have been from her falling into the magazine rack and hitting the toilet. Reva's stomach and digestive contents found partially digested food, which was estimated to have been about 2 hours before her death. Given that her death was about 3:15 in the morning, that means that she last ate around 1 o'clock in the morning. This became a point of contention because Oscar said that they ate dinner at around 7 p.m. and then nothing else. If she ate at 1 in the morning, it means that she got up in the middle of the night for a snack. The toxicology report came back negative, so the coroner determined that Reva died from multiple gunshot wounds. The absence of blood in her airway meant that she lost consciousness almost instantly after the headshot and didn't continue breathing for long, and this means that her suffering was severe but very brief. The coroner's testimony was emotionally devastating in court, and this affected both Oscar and Reva's family deeply. For her parents, the findings were heartbreaking, but her mother said that she found some comfort in believing that Reva's death was quick. Oscar Pistorius, on the other hand, was again arrested that very same day that everything happened, but now he had been charged with murder. After a very public bail hearing, he was released on bail 8 days later under strict conditions, and he remained free while awaiting trial, mostly with his family and preparing for his defense. The trial began in March 2014 in South Africa's High Court with Judge Masipa presiding. The prosecutors argued that Oscar intentionally shot Steenkamp after an argument, and the defense said that he mistakenly believed she was an intruder. In September 2014, Judge Masipa acquitted Pistorius of murder, but convicted him of culpable homicide, meaning that this was a negligent killing. She felt that he did not mean to kill Reva, but she ruled that firing through a closed door was reckless. He was also convicted on one firearm-related charge involving a different incident at a restaurant, but in October 2014, Oscar Pistorius was sentenced to 5 years in prison for culpable homicide with a concurrent suspended sentence for the firearm offense. For those of us here in the United States, based on what I could find, culpable homicide in South Africa is somewhat an equivalent to manslaughter here. He served about 1 year in prison before being released in October 2015 to house arrest, though. The prosecution appealed that verdict, so in December 2015, the Supreme Court of Appeals overturned the culpable homicide conviction and found Oscar guilty of murder under what's called dolus eventualis, which means that he had to have known that his actions could cause death. Let me know what your thoughts are on that initial ruling and the secondary ruling, though, because I would love to know if you feel that these punishments fit the crime. Judge Masipa resentenced him once again in July 2016 to 6 years in prison, which many people felt was still very lenient. The state appealed again in November 2017, and the Supreme Court of Appeals increased the sentence from 6 to 15 years minus time already served. Oscar returned to prison and was later transferred to a facility that was better suited for disabled inmates. After several legal reviews and delays related to sentencing, he became eligible for parole. On January 5, 2024, so a little over 2 years ago, Oscar was released on parole after serving almost 10 years in custody and supervision combined. He's going to remain under strict parole until 2029, including limits on where he can go, mandatory rehab, and a ban on profiting from the case, meaning he can't write books or do interviews or anything that's paid like that. For Reva's family, this legal journey has been exhausting and emotionally draining. While they've said that they accept the justice system's decisions, they've also said that no amount of jail time for Oscar will bring Reva back or equate to the life sentence that they themselves are enduring without their daughter. They started the Reva Steenkamp Foundation in her memory to help victims of DV and campaign against it. June Steenkamp, so Reva's mom, confronted Oscar personally in prison. And in South Africa, part of the parole process requires the offender to meet with the victim's family if they agree to. I found that to be very interesting because that is not a part of the process here in the US. She said that Oscar was apologetic in that meeting, but she still feels that he hasn't told them the truth, and her parents are still convinced that Oscar knew it was Reva behind that door. February 14th will never be the same for those who knew Reva. What should have been a day of love turned into a day of mourning. Each year, many South Africans remember her, and some wear black in her memory as well in protest against violence against women. That is something that Reva was very passionate about. Her story and legacy sadly are tied to how she died, but she should be remembered for how she lived, passionately, kindly, and with aspirations to make a positive difference in this world. As for Oscar, his story is a dramatic rise and fall and tells us how a split-second decision can ruin multiple lives. May Reva's soul rest in peace, and I hope that her loved ones find solace in their memories of her. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. Hold your loved ones close this Valentine's Day, and please know how much I cherish each and every one of you. Make sure to take excellent care of yourselves this week, and don't forget to be your own Valentine too, because self-love and self-care is very important. Nurses' orders. Don't forget to drop our blue butterfly handshake in the chat if you made it this far, and I will see you next time. Bye.